that given the paradigms of Babel and Yerushalayim, which was a political battle, which was more central, you study Talmud, the questions of Talmud Bavli, Talmud Yerushalmi, those who lived in Jerusalem, there was always animosity between both communities. That's Shtibelach of 2,000 years ago. Today there's instant communication. Today we live in a shrunken world in which Jews all over the world participate in every type of experience that takes place in Israel. So even though you may not physically live there, your mental set, your daily life is colored by, influenced by, shaped by the type of society that is emerging within Israel. And I know many Jews wake up in the morning many times looking at the New York Times, hoping that Israel should not appear on the front page. Baruch Hashem, now we could, read the editorials. As long as, and the Iran business, I know how I saw Jews, how they felt about this business. And I remember even in San Francisco, I saw, the embarrassment, and then trying to explain, but there's a deep embarrassment. Not embarrassment, depends what your political policies are. So therefore, I would want to make thesis number one. We all live willy-nilly, if we like it, in Jerusalem. And therefore, the way Jerusalem will build or influence the Jewish polis of the Middle East will define, willy-nilly, if we like it or not, the complexity, character, agenda, and direction of Jewish history. There is no diaspora community which is autonomous. There is one Jewish people with one Jewish agenda. How do we build a modern Jewish nation in different parts of the world? And I'm not making an Aliyah speech. I'm making a description of what I believe in fact takes place, and that the quicker we realize it, I think the healthier we will be. And therefore, one of the failures of modern synagogue life, and it's very interesting, the people are far more ahead of where the leadership sometimes is. The failure of Jewish education and the synagogue to mirror that what should be taught at the shul should be the very lifeblood of the issues of Eretz Yisrael. Israel should not be filtered through UJA shlichim. It should be filtered through our educational structures, be it synagogues, schools, etc. As an example, when the Sabra Shatila incident occurred, people should have been studying the whole moral ambiguities of power, the problems of moral restraints in times of war, the whole question of, are you responsible to people who potentially are your enemies? Those issues should have been studied in grades 7, 8, 9 in United Talmud Torah and in Allied, in all your schools. And the failure of Jewish life, often in the diaspora, is because it's unanchored to any reality situation. It is telling stories when there is history being made and shaped, and moral discussions should be had, and it's not had. The synagogue goes on, the schools go on, as if nothing happened in Jewish history. This is thesis number one. It's in light of that thesis, therefore I'm not interested anymore in Jewish diaspora. I'm interested in the Jewish people. My love for Israel is not because I love the land. I'm not a mystic. I'm not a Nachmanides. I'm committed to Jewish history. And I'm committed to the drama of Jewish history. And I really believe that Jewish people are an important carrier of what history should be and can be. It is not Israelis. It is the Jewish people. And Israel is the nerve center, if we like it or not, in the politicization and what I would call giving a national political consciousness to Jewish experience. It is the repudiation of the German experience. Israel has transformed Jewish consciousness. In the German experience in the early 20th century, both in the philosophies of Hermann Cohen and in Franz Rosenzweig, they tried seriously to negate the concept of Judaism as a national consciousness. They preferred Germans of the Judaic persuasion, of the Mosaic persuasion. Because fundamentally, even for Franz Rosenzweig, the ones who really shape history are Christianity. Jews live at the ends of history, if you read his Stern der Losung in terms of the Star of Redemption. The shapers of history are Christianity. The Jews are the ones who in some way celebrate eternity. And therefore for Rosenzweig, the important framework of Jewish life was the celebration of the holy, the Shabbos, the Chagim. But this has been repudiated. Fundamentally, the national consciousness is central to Jewish self-understanding. Judaism is not a religion, it is not a faith community, it is a people, a nation. This was not discovered by Mordechai Kaplan. This was founded by Moses, and Spinoza understood this very well in the Tractatus. And Maimonides understood this well, that the Torah is a constitution for a political nation. And therefore, without an understanding of politics, without an understanding of what it means to build a nation, you don't understand Judaism. If you lack an appreciation of what it means to forge a nation, you lack an appreciation for the moves of Moses. You don't bring the longing for immortality, as you do in Christianity, or redemption, as the nerve center for the understanding of Judaism. To understand Judaism, it is not salvation that you seek. Not salvation. That's not the issue. What you seek is the building of a polis, of a nation. A nation constituted by a covenantal commitment to its constitution, which is the Torah. And Sinai is the founding constitutional assembly in which the community accepted to live by this framework. And from then on began, what do we mean by the Constitution we got stuck by? But ultimately, the centrality of law, the centrality of norms, the centrality of building community and national consciousness is central to Jewish understanding. And I claim that Jerusalem and the Zionist revolution placed once again in Jewish consciousness that central idea. And therefore, it is understandable why people think there's dual loyalty. It's understandable why people will say, what will happen if the United States fights Israel? Whose side would you be on? And it's natural why Jews would say that it's for the best of Western civilization to support Israel in order to avoid that embarrassment. But I don't think there is an issue of dual loyalty, because ultimately the loyalty to the Jewish nation is not a secular category. It is a search for meaning and for spiritual integration into the world. And therefore there is no church in Judaism. It's a mistake when I hear theologians talk about the church and the synagogue. We have no synagogue. There is no synagogue, as there is a church. What you have in Judaism is a community. And if 10 Jews gather together and daven, it's holy. It's not bad to build something like this. Shatnez, especially when it's snowing outside. But the point is, you know, it's like a more or less elaborate shtibel. But the point is that that's my, Jerusalem fantasy. Now, we also built our Jerusalem shtibels. You look at Hechel Shlomo. I mean, it's also. Now, the point is, this is the crucial notion. The people is the category that has to be central, not the synagogue. And therefore, there's no bishops, there's no hierarchy, and I will prove it in another time in my next book, where even the community is a legal concept of authority. You're not allowed to institute new legislation that the community themselves cannot live by. There is therefore not just a hierarchy of authority. Authority resides in the community's ability to abide by the law. The community is the central notion. Okay. If this is the thesis, I'd like to then begin. Because I have to clarify. So it's not an Israel-centered talk, it's a Jewish people talk. It's about time we start talking about the Jewish people. Forget about Israel, diaspora, etc. Thesis 2. The Zionist revolution would have been sane, would have in some way been plausible and reasonable if they decided to establish a new people in Uganda. If they would have gone to Uganda or Berbeja, I don't know where, and say, Gunuk Golis, Gunuk exile, you're vulnerable to anti-Semitism, being separate from other people, your only future in Western civilization is to be a nation state. And if they would have found a neutral piece of territory and built a new nation, that happens in history where new nations are built. And then we would have been a normal people like any other. We would have been like Danes or Frenchmen, and Aleph Bet Yoshua and Israeli dreams to be a normal people would have been realized. That would have been a plausible move. The most heroic and impossible move that I believe Zionism undertook was to establish this nation in the cradle of their historical memories. 2, the most boldest move was to attempt the ingathering of the exiles, the belief that the Jewish people can really live together in one state. That was the most insane leap that I believe we have not yet plumbed the depths of that great fantasy. Why do I make that claim? Because the fact that the revolution of rebuilding a Jewish people along normal political categories, ending 1,800 years of exilic history, ending that, and attempting to bring about that revolution in a land that forces you psychically to have to touch your most elemental memories, is the most emotionally charged and difficult thing for historical people to do. Because when in coming home, what you're really doing is touching the roots of your psyche. And there are some very serious therapists here, so I hope they give me permission to play amateur for a moment. They're Talmidim of mine, so they have their heads from Rebbe a bissel. So they'll let me, say this. In my reflection on the way the human personality develops, we always expose ourselves to different experiences. You go through different things, you meet different things, you have a new experience, and you sort of go to a holiday, whatever that may be, or sometimes it could be a painful experience or a joyful experience, and it shocks you a little bit because it doesn't fit into the way you normally live. But then you forget about it after a week, a month. It depends on how long it takes before that unsettling experience passes away. However, there are moments in a human being's development when he goes through certain experiences which in some way shatter the sense of continuity of himself, in which he doesn't recognize how he's able to bring all that he was in the past to a new future, given this hiatus, given this chasm, given this new dimension that suddenly begins to claim him. So he may want to run away from the shattering new thing because he doesn't know how to deal with it. But it suddenly creates a profound shock in his own identity because he doesn't recognize himself. And what usually happens when we go through these shattering transitional experiences, that we begin to rethink all that we were and begin to have to give a new interpretation of our past in light of this changed experience in order to build an integrative identity into the future. The past, I would claim, is not a given that remains there, but that the past constantly takes on a different significance from the moment we do a reinterpretation. There is not a sense of a fixed data shaping the psyche, but rather the psyche is molded by many, many experiences. Now, the type of weight we will give to those different experiences depends on the key interpretive moments of our lives. Sometimes it could be marriage, it could be tragedies. For me, it was Aliyah. In other words, you suddenly have to look again at yourself. And you say, who am I? And the I is not a static notion. The I is constantly changing as the interpretive principles change as well. What is true about the psyche, in other words, about human identity, in other words, we don't have a self that's finished, an I that's waiting to be found. Like many young people say, I'm looking to find myself. It's the great illusion as if there's something there to be found, finished. We are always recreating who we are. We're always giving a new artistic pattern to our sense of who we are, depending on the moment of the interpretive key. When are we interpreting? What is forcing us to go back? What is demanding of us to look at ourselves again in a new way? Israel, the Jewish people coming home in this revolution, is this transitional experience. It is a shattering moment in which the Jewish people coming back home, touching the beginnings of their history, are forced to have to look at it at another way. Let me give you an example, just to make sense of what I'm talking about. Did any of you ever attend a kibbutz of Shomer HaTzayir on Passover? Any of you? Okay. Did you ever listen to their Passover Seder? Did you ever read the Passover Agadot in Israel? They're marvelous to see. Now, if you would go, for example, could you imagine telling the story of a Palmachnik or an Air Force pilot who developed a sense of his own ability to handle problems, who has a sense of reality, who knows about power, who knows about bombs, who knows about terror, and tell him the story that the liberation struggle from Egypt, which was his early memory, took place how? We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. And what happened? Remember my father's story. What, there was an underground development? We formed cells. We poisoned the waters. What did we do? What did we do? How did we go free? So if you read Walter's book, Exodus and Revolution, he sees this liberation theology. If you read South American frameworks, they love the Exodus as a theory of revolution, of a class overcoming, oppression. But how was the story told in Jewish history for 2,000 years? You know whose name doesn't appear in the whole Passover Seder? Moshe Rabbeinu. Why can't we say he also had something to do with it? Because what we taught is a very deep theology. There's a deep theory of history in the Passover Seder. In the Passover Seder, there's a vision of history which says that what happens in the world is not through our efforts. What happens in the world doesn't take place from human initiative. What happens in the world is a reflection of a secret design in history which works itself out irrespective of human efforts. It's a Marxist view without revolution. There is a Hegelian thrust. History moves by its own inexorable rules and directions. We may not even be aware of it. And that's the song my father would sing, V'hi she'amda. V'hi she'amda lavaseinu shelo echad uvad amad b'chaloteinu. It was not just one nation that tried to destroy us. We weren't even aware of the dangers in history. We weren't aware of what really history awaited us. But there was a secret plan. And that's the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis is a psychological story of how people think that they're building their own family life, but what's really happening is God is preparing a larger perspective of history. You think it's a psychological story of children fighting with mothers wanting achievement for their children. But already, Rebecca knows that already when she says there's two nations going on here. You don't understand what's going on. But what's really happening is something is being prepared, and here Van Rad is right. Genesis is the prolegomena to Exodus. People seem to be freely acting in a family drama, but what really is happening is people are being prepared for a major event in their lives. We in some way act, but there's a larger scheme that takes place. And there was a midrash that said that Ephraim left Egypt, tried to leave before. And it was total failure. And when did the redemption come? And this is why the Last Supper was so crucial in terms of the Christian story, because they expected redemption that night. And that's the story of Rabbi Akiva sitting the whole night and talking, because the night of Pesach is the night of Leil Shimurim. It's the night of sudden surprises. And that's why they were standing up the whole night. This is the night when things break into history when you're not prepared. That's the whole meaning of the matzah and the chametz. That history is shaped not by intention, not by plans, not by blueprints, but by episodes which break into your consciousness and force you to move in directions which you could not anticipate by your own intentions. History moves you. There's a thrust. There's a direction. You're thrown into freedom. You're thrown into the desert. You are God's instrument for his mad dream to be the Melech HaOlam. He uses you for his mad fantasy that history can be the container of his dream for man. You think he gave up after the Garden of Eden, but he doesn't get defeated because he's a Jewish God. You think that the Garden of Eden would have in some way let him know what he really created. It should have reminded him that in some way this mad vision that human beings can be in the image of God, this mad vision of what you think people could become, this mad dream. And what are prophets? Prophets are those who hear God's madness. They are touched by his madness, and therefore they become other. They're no more the same. They can't walk any more the same. They heard God's prayer. And therefore, what is the story of Passover? It's the story of God acting when he is moved to act. What is that? And therefore, when he is moved to act, the players, Pharaoh, Zango, and he plays with the cunning of reason. And Pharaoh's like a boobala. A boobala. You know the story, he hardens his heart. What does he mean? Like Cassius Clay lifts him up and bongos, makes him feel that there's something there, and that he defeats him. And for 2,000 years, Jews told that story. And that was the paradigm of history. The paradigm of history was that we are an instrument of divine plan. And therefore, what was Zionism? What was Zionism? Zionism put Moses back in the Agoda and took God out. And therefore, how do kibbutznikim tell the story of Pesach? The story of our people's struggle for freedom. That Jews were meant to be a free people. They love the Passover story. But it's a story of a national revolt. It is not a story of some sort of mysterious laws to history. And therefore, when Zionists read the prophets, what do they see in Amos and Micah? And I remember speaking to Shimon Peres. And what was the Zionist way of touching their memory? When this new crisis of coming back to Israel, it forced them to have to meet Amos. If they would have gone to Uganda, they wouldn't have had to meet Amos and Isaiah. Then they could have just been normal. They wouldn't have to reinterpret the whole baggage. Do you understand? In coming back home, they touched the roots of their whole historical identity. So how can you leave it alone? So therefore, what happens to Amos and Micah for Israelis? I mean, the thinking Israelis. They're social revolutionaries. Shimon Peres wasn't embarrassed to tell me, I was smiling when he said it, that the founders of socialism were the prophets. You know, it's crazy. And a person says, sure, justice, justice thou shalt pursue, the concern for the poor. The prophets were God-intoxicated madmen. You can't read Jeremiah, Isaac. You know, could you imagine Israeli chutzpah that they wanted to teach the Bible and take God's name out of it? Now, what do you mean they wanted to take out of it? It was a deep denial or reinterpretation of the primary memory of my psyche. Instead of my father being a rejecting figure, he was my friend. But how? Don't ask me. One time he gave me an ice cream. So you build on that one little text in your memory, you suddenly reinterpret him completely. We reinterpret the people who shaped our lives. And therefore, in the Zionist context, you have to reinterpret your prophets, and you have to make them socialist revolutionaries. And therefore, what is fundamentally, I mean, this great heroic thing that you have in Israel, this is what I want you to understand. Israel is a nerve center of everyone touching his memory, but each one in a different way. The argument in Israel is a question, who was our Zayda, and how are you going to talk about it? That's why there's such confusion about who is a Jew. And the question is, really, it's a serious question. What do you mean, who is a Jew? It's not a question of conservative, reform, orthodox. No, that's shallow. That's not the issue. The issue began not out of conservative reform. It began with Amos the Shalit, who was a Navy man, or it began with Brother Daniel, who came to Israel and said, I want to be accepted on the law of return, even though I'm a Catholic, because I fought in Auschwitz, I fought to save Jews in the Second World War. Can't I be a Jew and a member of the Jewish people, even though spiritually I express myself through Catholicism? As my Professor Pollack once remarked to me, I don't know, Doug, if I ever told you the story, of him saying to me once in Fordham University when I studied with the Jesuits for 5 years, he says, David, what's better, an atheist Jew or a Jew who was an atheist but found God through Catholicism? He knew exactly the right question to ask. That's what a question. And I couldn't understand the question. Why is he asking me that? I said, Robert, that's the most sensitive issue. You've touched the core of the Jewish ambiguity and complexity. And then I found out, he was my Rebbe in philosophy. You remember my first book in Maimonides, I speak about him. For 5 years I walked in Fordham with him. And then 20 years later, he was dying of cancer. I talked to him he says, David, I never forgot you as my student. I loved you always, and he died. And then his wife called me and said, could I write something for Robert? Because he loved me and respected. I remember him always telling me that I have to redeem Spinoza from the excommunication. And she said, David, did you know that he was a Jew? I said, Robert Pollack was a Jew? Yes, he was a student of Wilson in Harvard, and then he converted to Catholicism. After reading Wilson, I understand why. Now, in other words, his question was, and this was Brother Daniel's question, can't I be a member of the Jewish people, but yet finding my spiritual life in another way? And that was the issue. Because the crazy law of return. Because what is the law of return? It's not Israelis. The law of return is the secular Israelis' last sense of solidarity with the whole Jewish people and with his drama of Jewish history. The law of return is the way he says, my memories are your memories. I come from the same places you come from, even though I've overthrown the whole tradition. That's what Chok HaShvut means. Israeli Zionism stands on that law. So the question is, who should be admitted into that law? So what do you say? If you're an atheist, a Bundist, a Marxist, atheist, revolutionary, yeah. But if you found spirituality as a Buddhist, no? Crazy. In other words, Jews prefer an atheist than a sensitive mystic who comes from Eastern religion. A Mudna people. Strange. But in a sense, deeply, what that is saying is that the Jews are battling about making sense of their memory. They don't know yet what interpretation to give to the memory, because the way you interpret the memory is going to make possible some sort of integrative identity for the future. If we have no reinterpretation of our memory, then in some way we don't know how to go forward. And that's why Israelis tolerate the Meisharim Jews. No one understands why we tolerate Hirsch, who's prepared to deal with Jordan. No one could understand how come you tolerate 100,000 people who don't want to pay taxes, or hundreds of thousands. No one could understand how a society can tolerate 200,000 or 250,000 people who don't want to serve in the army. It's a strange type of phenomena. What is there about Israeli society that allows, Shapiro to get up in the Knesset and talk in ways that seem so strange? That Peretz should talk the way he talks. What is it that they love about Shapiro, the Aguda? Why do they form coalitions with these people who want to bring us back to the ghetto? Isn't it strange that Israeli society gives birth to whom? To the deepest anti-Zionist movement that is growing in history? Isn't it strange that in Israel we have recreated all of Eastern Europe? Here in Israel is the great revolt against Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europe has been recreated. If there's a sense of the response to the Holocaust, of recreating everything that was in Eastern Europe, even the way they talked Yiddish. Chevron, Mir, Ponovich, Vishnitz, Chassidische Stiebelach. No more Stiebelach, Delfelach. You go to Vishnitz in Bnei Brak. You would think you get it's not about the Vishnitzer Dorf. With Malchus, the weddings that they have there. Or you go to Shapiro's weddings at the Hilton, Kenai the Horror. And you see, and look at the Aguda, and you look at Shas, and you say, what's going on here? And you look at Shalamet Aloni, and you say, how do they live together? Or you go meet Aleph Bet Yoshua, or you meet poets or artists. You go to Tel Aviv and meet the Bohemians, and then you go to Yerushalayim, you go crazy, you don't know what's going on. How do you live there? What type of society is it? Why do we tolerate it? Why do we tolerate it? When Moshe Feinstein dies, they come to Jerusalem to bury him, and 100,000 Jews come to his funeral. All anti-Zionists, and Jerusalem closes down. And Teddy Kollek says to me, David, there's no traffic in the city, it's terrible. But the black hats take over. What's going on? Why do we tolerate this? My wife tells me stories that she was walking once time to visit, Shchuna, and with the rock throwing, with this. What do we tolerate it for? Why do we tolerate these nuisances all the time? Why? Numerically, they're not that many. Why do they have so much power, people ask me? Why don't you put them down? What do you allow it for? Don't you understand why? Because they remind me of my Zeta. If I get rid of them, I have to cut out my whole guts. Every time a Jew at a Perlach walks in Yerushalayim, the secular Israeli sees his Zeta. So he revolted against him, but he's still in him. Can't you understand? Everything psychically, if any of you have ever gone in therapy, to have it all at once coming at you in conflicting messages and try to build a healthy psyche? That's what I meant, that we would have gone in Uganda. What does give them normal? We'd walk in the streets, my Zayda wouldn't be haunting me, and I just would go watch Bridget Bardot and I have a normal movie. Friday night, Shabbos, whatever I wanted. And the black hats would still live in Jerusalem, and they'll still pray for the Mashiach to come. But no, we decided to go through rebuilding a new identity while being haunted by the old. There is no peace to a people whose memory allows them never to rest. They have to always reinterpret. And therefore Israelis allow so many different rhythms to be present because it's all who we are. And therefore, to live in Jerusalem is to meet it all. And what's happening today in Jewish life is a battle about who we were, the interpretation we're going to give to who we were, and what we want to become. In my concluding part of my lecture, I want to give you two models of who we were, and these two models will be affecting who we can become. One model of who we were, deeply, if we look back in our memories and go back into our histories, one deep feature of being a Jew was his deep maladjustment and estrangement from the world. A deep feature of my memory was a way in which my people were able to say no to their environment and not to define themselves on the basis of what the world was. This is expressed in the biblical concern for the rejection of idolatry, the concern of not being like the nations of the world, the concern of not being influenced by the Philistines, the concern in some way of building a polis which in no way shared with the ideals and dreams of what the nations around them were. The deep feeling that it's our task to be in opposition to the world. And this is the whole term of Abraham, Abraham ha'ivri, Abraham the Hebrew. The whole world is on one side, Abraham is on the other side. The Jews who say no, call it the iconoclast. The Jew who cannot be adjusted to the world. The Jew who lives in opposition to the world. The Jew who builds his own music, his own self-definition in light of his own interpretive categories and does not try to shape his own self-understanding in dialogue with the world. Jews live hafochba, dekulabach. Turning it, it's all there. A text-centered culture. You want to create, then give another interpretation for Torah. You opened up the Torah and you found who you are and you reinterpreted yourself and you learned and you learned and you learned. And you built your civilization internally without allowing external music to in some way confuse you. There were episodes of invasions, but the rabbis knew how to deal with that. And they dealt with the blocking of it. If one understands, how many have studied here Talmud Avodah Zarah? I suggest a tractate I called Avodah Zarah on idolatry. Very important, you should get it. Talmud Bavli Tractate Idolatry. If you look at the second half of the tractate, it doesn't deal anymore with idolatry, with pagans, with pagan culture, or how you're supposed to act towards pagan culture. Suddenly it starts talking about wine. Wine. Are you allowed to drink the wine of Gentiles? You know about this whole madness called kosher wines? Now what could be kosher, unkosher about wine? It's just grapes. So what's wrong with grapes? And what could be unkosher? And then you look at these kosher bottles, you know, it says cooked, baked before. You should, you know. I remember when I was a child and I was a firm boy and I went to my girlfriend's Seder, she became my wife, and she was from an irreligious family. And according to the halacha, if a Chal Shabbos pours the wine, it also was a big question if you can drink it. So here I'm at the Seder by my future father-in-law, and he's well thought I was a schlepp, I wasn't going to make a living in Bechlal. Who did his daughter fall in love with? We were kids, and I remember sitting at the Seder, and I was telling Barbie, what are we going to do when they pour the wine? So my father-in-law came and wanted to pour the wine. to me. I said, oh, don't bother. I don't want to impose upon you. Oh, then he comes to Bobby, and I come running around like a madman, the whole Seder, pouring the wine, not allowing him to pour the wine. And he said, okay, this is the last Seder I had with my future son-in-law. Now, what was this wine business? What's the wine? You know what the wine was? To make sure that Jews could never ever visit non-Jews. What are you laughing about? What do you think Kashrus did? Sholem didn't understand it. The rabbis were materialists in a Marxist sense. They knew how to bring about a revolution. And their view was, he who controls the pots controls history. They knew that people have to eat 3 times a day. Books, philosophers, that's garnish. Sholem said to me, I don't like a religion that's all with the pots and pans. So I said, Sholem, you don't understand. The pots and pans is the revolution. Because you got to eat 3 times a day. So what you have to go live in a community where there's a sheikhet. You have to go look for, I can't eat, you have to eat. No, how long can you eat lettuce? I mean, do you ever find what it means to eat kosher food and be invited by a non-observant Jew or a non-Jew to his home, and you're always saying, I ate? What would you like, this Perrier? I mean, it's made nimis already. Or I say to you, lettuce. Lettuce. I just heard with the Orthodox Union of Orthodox Congregation, you can't even ask for lettuce anymore because they discovered ants in lettuce. I don't know what they discovered. So when I come to, I'll have lettuce. So to avoid that embarrassment, so what do? You stay home. You never socialize. You never meet guys. And therefore, what did the halacha do? The halacha made it impossible to meet goyim. The halacha made sure that you have to live only with Jews. The rabbis created an ability to be constantly maladjusted in the world. Can't you understand? Why do you think Jews produce so many psychiatrists working this problem out? Ultimately, this is the legacy of the Talmudic civilization. Deeply so. I mean, if one understands Talmud deeply, and I've studied Talmud for 35 years, the soul of the Talmud is a war against the world. Roman civilization understood that. The Talmud created a people who always needed each other. This brilliant idea of having a minyan, of needing a minyan. Where does the halacha require 10 Jews? It doesn't require it. Why did they do it? Because they forced you to have to need community. As my father brilliantly told me, Alav Shalom, those wissen du wird, mein Rabbonim machen ich kein Minyan, sen pushete Jiden wie ich machen ein Minyan. 10 Jews, what a beautiful symbol. So this was one. And the power of orthodoxy, was its ability to build an identity without taking into account reality. And therefore, among the Orthodox, they're the only ones who are having 7, 8, 9, 10 children. Everyone says, well, what's about ecology? And what's about population problems with the food? They don't read the New York Times. They said, let the goyim worry about that. That's what Eden. And they populate and populate. Their great strength is that they in some way are moved by forces which are no way defined by what is outside. Hafoch ba, bekula ba. Turn in it, all is in it. Oh, I wish I could have taken you to the passion of a yeshiva boy who woke up in the morning with Rab Chaim, learned Talmud to 2, and then my schedule was from 4 to 9. We went back again to learn Talmud, and then we ate supper from 9 to 9:30, and from 9:30 to 1 we prepared ourselves for the shiurim the next day. And on Saturday night, we would sit and listen to our teacher teach Talmud till 1 o'clock at night. The passion. I remember I cried when I left Lakewood. What it meant. Ein Torah nikneit, ele misha meimet atzmai ba'olei shel Torah. Torah is only acquired by one who only dies in the tents of Torah. Lo yomush sefer haTorah hazeh mipicha. Torah should never separate itself from your mouth. And the rabbis ask, if you have to learn Torah day and night, how will you ever make a living? That they ask themselves that question is madness. So the women work on it, yes. That was one solution. So Edie, when you will write your responsa literature, I think they will quote you. Now, however, the answer, which was a serious discussion in the Talmud, I just want you to sense the passion. What it meant to live in a world where everything of you was taken by it. It was like being in a total mikvah of learning. You breathe Torah, you dream Torah. I used to dream Rambam. I dreamt Rambam. All of my life was that. The great pain I felt as a rabbi, which was so impossible for me as a yeshiva boy becoming a rabbi, is that for me it was all of life, and for my congregation it was a drosha. It was marginal. And the gap between my passion and my intensity and what it meant to the community was totally painful. The lack of seriousness, the lack of being claimed by that totally. That's the greatness of Orthodoxy. That's the greatness of the shtetl. That's the greatness of a tradition that I love, and that's why I'll never leave it. It's totality. It is everything, and if it is not everything, it is nothing. That's what love is about. Love is madness. And anyone who has ever fallen in love must know that. There's no contractual relationships in love. There's insanity. Then you achieve sobriety afterwards. In the second resurrection. Now, however, if you don't have that as an initial framework, you could never work out the tsaros later on. There must be this elemental, total experience, which in some way is the essence of your soul. That's what Orthodoxy gave. That was the legacy, one legacy of Judaism. One great value. And Orthodoxy taught the Jewish world to be misplaced. And in a sense it had to be. Because a Jew would only be at home when the Mashiach will come. To be at home in an unredeemed world, that's the very denial of the essence of Judaism. I will only be at home in a world that God is at home. And therefore Jews pray for the Shekhinah who's in Golus. We pray because God is suffering. Aseh lamancha, God, you also suffer. Anochi evedimcha. And therefore Jews' homelessness, in the deepest metaphysical sense, is because they also share God's madness of a redeemed world. And until there is a redeemed world, we are not fully at home. And therefore the custom in Jewish life was never to complete a house. There was always supposed to be a part of your house which was never fully completed. That's why we break a glass under the chuppah. Because couples who are getting married thinking they're going home have to know that before they build a home, they have to feel the broken pieces of an unredeemed world. If you cannot feel the unredeemedness of the world, then you cannot really be a Jew. A Jew carries in his breast the vision that the world can be other. There can be something other, which is the seed of the deepest revolutionary ethos. We are not at home. Mashiach has not yet come. This is one thrust, the no people, the people who say no to a world of idolatry. But then there is another thrust. A thrust of a people who, instead of feeling hostility to the world, believe that one day the world will in some way form a shared and universal humanity. A world of Isaiah, a world of a dream in which swords will be turned into plowshares, a world in which justice will flow like the sea, a world which would see a transformed humanity, where man's nature would in some way take on a different quality of gentleness. That was another world, a world where Jews felt they could affect and change the world. This is also, God elected them not only to say no to the world, but God elected them to be a blessing to the world. So on one level, we live in opposition to the world, and on another level, we live in hope of a transformed world, of a changed world, of a better world. Call it the deepest dreams of solidarity with the world. These two tensions always lived in the Jewish soul. Therefore, even I can in time, right into even the Middle Ages, Halevi and Maimonides write, if Jews are supposed to affect the world, but they're such a weak people. So according to Halevi and according to Maimonides, they are affecting the world through Christianity and Islam. Christianity and Islam are the instruments for our political action in the world. And through Christianity and Islam, when the Mashiach will come, the world will recognize the true God of Israel as the king of the whole world. This was Rav Kook's vision. The deep mystic vision of Kook is this belief in the ultimate unity of everything. And the hope that Israel, in coming home, would in some way unleash new universal powers of love. Kook saw the coming home to Jerusalem not Auschwitz, our terror of the world, our hatred for the world, but rather for Kook, who lived before Auschwitz, Israel was the beginning of a new universal power of love that would generate out of the Jewish people. Strange how his vision led to Gush Emunim. But that's what Kook dreamed. And what happened? Why are we in such confusion? What's going on in the Jewish world today? When we lived in the ghetto, the dominant thrust was no. When the ghetto broke down, we believed in some way that the world is a place for Jews to act in. We in some way felt, and you read Mendelssohn's Jerusalem, you must read Mendelssohn's Jerusalem. Mendelssohn is the first philosopher of modernity who senses the struggle of on one level halacha and on the other level feeling part of the larger world. French Jews, German Jews felt this very strongly. Eastern Jews who joined the socialist revolution felt this as well. Now what happened? There was a belief that we could change the world. There was a belief that we could experience solidarity with the world. Suddenly this suppressed sense of solidarity, not only the no, not only the kashrus and the wine and all that other stuff, but the other things. Beloved is man created in the image of God. A God who's not only Jewish, but a God who brings me and breaks down the barriers between one human being and the other. Suddenly that began to surface. You know what happened? When that surfaced, many Jews says, but how can I embrace the world and yet continue a halacha which in some way says no to the world? How do you do both? How do you in some way believe that you're part of the whole world and yet carry a halacha which in some way makes you permanently ill at ease with the world? That double tension created the conservative reform movement. The reform movement didn't come because it wanted to just assimilate. That's a cheap understanding. The reform movement surfaced because they wanted to feel a new value. But they felt that they could not realize that value together with Shabbos, together with Kashrus, together with all those rules which in some way emphasized the ethnic particularity and separateness of the Jew. The kippah went, and this went, and didn't know. Then the conservatives said, wait, you're getting too late. There's another pole. You're getting the nation pole. And Reform said, we're not a nation, we're a faith. Herman Cohen says, ritual is not important. Ritual is only in the time Kashrus had to do with cleanliness. You know, those days they had pots which were dirty. What were they doing? The same thing like the Zionists do, reinterpreting their memory. So, oh, yeah, Kashrus was important in those days. I'm not rejecting my Zayda. My Zayda had Kashrus because he was concerned about trichnosis. But Baruch Hashem, we have the FAA, the health inspection laws, so my Zayda would not object to me eating there. You know, he would not. I mean, what's the... So in other words, what is he really saying? I'll tell you what my Zayda meant. And why was it possible to do that? Because his Zayda wasn't there to correct him. Because you never invite your Zayda to tell him, what did you mean? You only interpret your Zayda after he's gone. And that tension, we didn't know how to do it. So instead of orthodoxy standing there with loving criticism saying, Reform brethren, wait, maybe you can do it another way. We developed deep schisms in the Jewish people. Deep schisms. One emphasizing the no, the great no, the great alienation. The other saying, wait, our destiny is not to be permanently alienated. Our destiny is equally as well to affect the world. These two values are in permanent conflict with each other. And we don't know. And what is Israel? Israel is the same two tensions. Because what happened with the emancipation was destroyed with Auschwitz. Auschwitz in some way brought home to Jews the illusion that they were at home. That's what Gershon Scholem wrote about when he wrote about the mistake that Germans thought that they were really at home. You misread the world, you dreaming Jews, you prophets who dream God's dreams. You misread the world. It was not an invitation to shape it. It was an invitation to disappear. You didn't read the cruelty of these mamzers. And therefore, what did Auschwitz mean? It crushed for a period of time that deep longing to experience solidarity with the world. We can only rely on ourselves. And therefore you have deeply in Israel an interesting merger between extreme nationalists and the Orthodox right-wing element. Both share the power of the no. Both share the alienation from the world. Both share the distrust of the world. And therefore both, Arik Sharon has to do with feeling like my brother. Arik Sharon doesn't know anything about Yiddishkeit. But yet Arik Sharon will go to a kibbutz in the West Bank or in Yehuda v'Shamron, depends on your political ideology. They danced around him in Simchas Torah. And they were singing, Arik Sharon, Melech Yisrael. Arik Melech Yisrael, King of Israel. And they danced around him. Now what was there about Arik? A Rebbe, I understand you dance around. A Rebbe who learns Torah. But Arik? What happened to the Jews? Because deep in Israel, branded in our soul, and this is what the world doesn't understand, is a profound distrust of the world. Engraved in our neshama, Ein al mi lismoch ela al atzmenu. We have no one to rely on except on ourselves. And then comes the anti-Zionists, or come the nationalists and the right-wing nationalists, and they merge together, both saying what's important is not what the Goyim think, what's important is what the Jews think. Deep. Because Auschwitz created in the Jewish psyche the repudiation of modernity. From Spinoza, from Mendelssohn, until Auschwitz, Jews believed that modernity was something that they were meant to play an important role in. And therefore Israel became this profound sense of no to the world. And for many Jews, it became the place that they could run to in case there would be a pogrom. Because deep in the Jews, even of Canada and America, was, yeah, we're home, but you never know. It's good that it's there. It's good that it's there. So what is Israel and what is Jerusalem? In terms of our memory, it is the place we gather together among the clan to say no to the world. But for me, Auschwitz does not define my perception of Israel. For me, Israel is not where we come to rely only on ourselves. For me, Jerusalem and the future, it's not a Mr. Cook vision, but for me, Jerusalem connects us in a much deeper way with the world. If we sought the ghetto, we chose the wrong place. The very meaning of political nationhood is to live in response to the world, in dialogue with the world. Israel is the new crystallization where we were awkward teenagers tripping on each other from the emancipation onwards, not knowing how to retain our elemental sense of identity of our past with the new sense of solidarity. Israel is the first opportunity to, in a healthy way, build a national identity, but not as a ghetto people. To build a national consciousness which is open to everything that is precious in the world. I spoke of the madness of the ingathering of the exiles, bringing Jews from all over the world to live. To me, you know what that symbolizes? That every Jew, wherever he comes from Yemen, he comes from Morocco, he comes from Germany, he comes from Poland, he comes from Russia, he comes from South Africa, he comes from all over. Then what has he done when he's come? Because in Israel, you're not a Jew, you're a Polish, a Romanish, I'm an American, and I will remain an American until 120 years. And I say it proudly, I don't mind that. What does that mean? That the Jews have come home to their country, and they've brought in that small place a little bit of the whole world. And I say to Israelis, the ingathering of the exiles means that nothing human, which is of gentle and precious worth, should be alien to our soul as a people. We are not a racist people. We are a people who come from all over the world. We bring different melodies, different dialects, different cultures, different experiences. Can we really shape all these memories into a people? The question then before us, in the discussion and the arguments about our memories, of how we interpret our memories. It's wonderful that we're arguing. We're alive. There's a vitality. But the question that we're going to have to decide is our destiny to say no, or is our destiny equally as well to find in our soul the ability to embrace the world with a sense of trust and love. For me, Jerusalem is not a city of siege. It's an invitation to dream. Thank you. Yes, sure.
ladies and gentlemen, there are microphones on both sides of the room, and Pastor Hartman will intervene comments and questions.
Your closing remark was the ability to say no with a question mark or the trust and all humanity, so to speak. And I just wondered, with the politics and religion, be it in Israel or throughout the world, particularly I mentioned that the Torah is the Jewish constitution. I just wonder, how does the Supreme Court of Israel have, or do they have, the rights and freedoms defined in relationship to the Constitution or the Torah? And in this sense, does this assist in bringing some so-called interpretation in a modern democracy such as Israel?
So can you give me, I'm sorry, I didn't clearly grasp the complexity of the question.
The question briefly would be, perhaps, that how does the Supreme Court decision affect the rights and freedoms as they are defined in the Torah or the Constitution?
Yeah, well, okay.
Does this become precedent law?
Okay, good. I hear that. Let's get another question. Dr. Shah? Next. I'll just deal with a few that maybe there's some overlapping. Yes?
First, I think one of the reasons that I found that Christians who have a law that they should pass the law, that is medieval times, that Christians should not eat with the Jews.
Yes.
They found the same necessity to keep the Christian away from the Jews.
Yes.
Things have been studied.
Yes. Did they also have a mad kashrus laws and all that?
No,
they just said don't eat with them, but they didn't go through milchiks and fleishiks with them. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
But I too have been consumed by a desire not to say no and to live with my Gentile friends.
Absolutely.
Whom I have many.
Right.
However, in fact, I institute today another invite to another Christmas party.
I hope you said no. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But in order to find an answer to this, I was given to study Christianity and Islam at the University of Toronto, and I found in many things I still have to say no. To be proper dark, I find the deep trouble after going into this knowledge very deeply in depth and writing papers on it. And this still troubles me. Somehow, true, I have to find a compromise.
Right.
I can't choose just between yes or no.
Right.
That in the face of Christian and Muslim evolution, isn't it a little too dangerous?
Okay, good. I'd like to deal with both. Let's just start, then you could begin. Let me just deal with these two, and I'll come to those two in a second.
This may have some
Bearing on my answer. Okay, thank you.
really the popular solidarity of the Greek.
Yes.
I mean, I've read your theories and your society, and really they think that there's a unity, the family unity among the Greeks, and the feeling is rising, and diaspora, and instead of it being cemented.
Okay.
And Israel has not accomplished
That sense.
that thing, and I'd like you to comment on that, because that has been a very issue and lately in Greek studies.
Okay. Okay, let me just try. You want the young man?
Yeah, I guess my question is really good. You seem to blame a rabbi as the one, or an Orthodox as the one who wanted us to say no, but isn't it in the Tanakh itself and told us to be opposed to death?
Yeah.
The expectations and the religion, and what the rabbi is telling us, is a manifestation of blessing.
Absolutely. Sure.
So you think we reject it?
Chas v'sholem. You see me wearing a kippah?
But you think we reject it and saying no?
No, but the Torah doesn't only want me to say no.
Why are you just saying that it was the rabbis?
No, the rabbis built a... okay. Good question. I appreciate it. Why did I say the rabbis is the Torah? Okay, good. See, when I want you to know, did you read my book, A Living Covenant? Oh, good. That's a Jew who lives with a messianic impulse. Not yet. Now, the sense is, when I say Torah, I mean the rabbis. Rabbis, Torah, it's all interchangeable for me because I'm a Talmudic Jew. Let me say the following. When it comes, the Torah today is not the constitution of the Jewish people. This is the problem. And maybe our saving grace. We have no shared agreement as to how we interpret our elemental foundational principles. In fact, many people have nearly historical amnesia. When I say to Israelis, we must go back to Sinai. So one person says, I was there in 56 in Ganuk. And I realize that my metaphors are totally different than his. You see, the given is that there isn't a consensus. And let me tell you what's happening. We're home. The home forces history and memory unwillingly upon us. That's what I mean the difference between Jerusalem and Uganda. You're cast into history against your will. The technological forward-moving consciousness meets history as soon as it puts its hand in the earth. That's what it means to walk in Jerusalem. You can't not sense history there. I remember Rose Wolf was with us at the Institute. She became drunk when she went with Aryeh, as the passion of history overwhelmed in the study group. You can't live in Yerushalayim without realizing that something deep is touching in you and you don't know how to deal with it. That's why many people run away from it quickly. That's why many people don't want to land in it. That's why many people don't want to land in it because look, there's too many imperfections there and they like to keep their memories clean. But it's very powerful. Now what has happened? From Jerusalem is coming schisms, battles, fights. You say, what's going on? Don't the Arabs, isn't it enough that the Arabs want to kill you? What are you fighting among yourselves? And people in Israel are asking, Ibadnu tchushat lo'umiyut. Have we lost a sense of nationalism? Do we have a chush mamlachtiyut? Do we have a political sense? There's a very great fear in the country. But what's happening? I don't feel bad about it. I want to tell you, it came to me in my travels in the last few weeks as I've been meditating on this, because I meet so many Jews in America concerned about the battles, Orthodox, Conservative Reform. I come today at Sal's home, the Canadian Jewish Congress, the Orthodox group answering Dov Marmer and Raza, Tumutzich, and this mikveh is close to this group and this one here. Shall I tell you? I've learned that when something is and won't change, then try to enjoy it. It's not going to change. We are not going to have a Congress of love-ins. And we're all going to get together and we're going to pass a resolution, we are one. It's like passing Jerusalem as central to the Jewish world didn't make Aliyah. We're people who like to make resolutions. And we're like people who like to think if you make a resolution, then you solve the problem. There's a Torah, and there's been a lot of history of interpretation, and different Jews have grown up in different ways. For the last 300 years, there's been an explosion of different perceptions as to what sense Jewishness is all about. There is not a consensus of agreement, not even among the Orthodox. It's a lie, it's fictitious. Look at the Satmar Lubavitch. Do you know in Bnei Brak what the literature from the Panovich Yeshiva, what the Rosh Yeshiva Rav Shach's car was painted with swastikas by Lubavitchers? What? You know what's going on? Do you know the two journals? What's going on? What? We think the Orthodox, it's all monolithic culture. Heißt nicht on. Halacha never united the Jews. It always divided them. In fact, kashrus, one of the therapeutic values of kashrus is it gave you an opportunity to express aggression. I don't eat in your house! Now the point is that there is a very deep sense I mean, we never were united. Who are we kidding ourselves? What's this myth of the Jewish people being united? What's this we are one? What's going on here? When were we ever one? In God's dreams, but never in reality. But you know what is nice now? So people say, but in Auschwitz we were one. In Auschwitz, Hitler didn't say, do you wear tzitzis or don't you wear tzitzis? Are you a Lubavitcher Chassid or you are a Litvak? Hitler took us all into the chambers. So who is Hitler? He's not my Rosh Hashiva? He's not my Rebbe? Hitler's the one who defines what a Jew is? And this I reject Fackenheim. And I reject all the Holocaust theologians. The one who wants to kill Jews? I have to know about the one who has to kill Jews, and I have to tell my Lubavitcher Chassid that I'm arguing with, or this other person I'm arguing, listen, sure, we could argue about this film, this mikveh, that, but let's not forget there's danger out there. So let's make sure that we don't lose perception of reality. Then we could have a nice, interesting fight. Do you know what's going on now beautifully? Can't you feel the joy of it? It's delicious. You know what's happening? Each one is painting a different picture of what he thinks the Jew should be. There's vitality in the Jewish world. Can you imagine a 3,000-year-old people still asking who is a Jew? Shoot. It's a 3,000-year-old people having a teenage identity crisis. That's a sign of vitality. We're still reinterpreting. We're still looking at ourselves again. As I said to one group, for one person, doing a mitzvah is uniting the masculine and feminine principles of divinity. For him, when he blows shofar, he's uniting the Shekhinah, which is in exile, together with the masculine principle, because the Shekhinah is the feminine principle in divinity. And every Friday night, when he makes Kiddush and he makes love and he welcomes the Shabbos, he's uniting two cosmic principles. For another Jew, when he's a Shabbos, he's trying to get some peace and rest. He's not interested in uniting the masculine and feminine principles of divinity. It's enough that he tries to keep his family together without trying to keep the cosmos together. So what does it mean? What does it mean? I say very pashut. You know what's happening now? You see, when we were traumatized by Nazis, we didn't give expression to our varieties of nigunim. Because the trauma of the Goyim was so deep, anti-Semitism was so deep, that we didn't even have a chance to talk from our own music. Now, there's something healthy in the Jewish world. We're arguing. We're arguing about being a Jew. I don't expect the Lubavitch to say to Hartman, we crown you as the great Jewish philosopher. I don't expect that to happen. Because they disagree with my theology. I understand that. I don't expect the Aguda non-Zionist to understand that for me Zionism is the most important event in Jewish history. We disagree. And we argue. We paint different pictures. I'm not looking for him to give me an OU, nor does I need to give him an OU. Finally, the Jewish world are arguing about Torah. Kahana quotes scripture. That's why we created a religious high school to battle Kahana. 90% of religious youth in Israel identified with Kahana. So instead of me saying, oi, how is that possible? I try to influence other youth to think differently. Jews are arguing now about the meaning of Torah. We're not just arguing about the campaign. So you know what we need now? You know what you got to do now? The Jewish world has to start learning. The Jewish world has to now argue. You know what's the time now? It's a time to stand up and have convictions. You can't, I remember, I always quote it, a person saying to me, you know, when he joined my synagogue in Montreal, and he says, instead of joining a Reform shul, why are you coming to an Orthodox shul? He says, instead of being a non-observant Reform Jew, I decided to be a non-observant Orthodox Jew. So what I'm saying is it's nonsense. Now, you know what the Jewish world, let's all be quiet, let's all be nice, we are one. No! We disagree. But the ones who have conviction are not only the right wing. The Reform movement didn't grow because it didn't have values and convictions. then let its congregants learn its own theology. If the people of Beth Tzedec have a definite point of view, then learn. Don't say, why are they passionate? You be passionate. Argue for your understanding of Torah. Argue for your understanding of the Jewish people. Argue for your understanding of what you want the Jewish state to be. Isn't it wonderful? Jews are arguing about Torah. Isn't that marvelous? We don't know who we'd like to be. So get out your Chumash. Get out your Talmud and show me how you'll interpret the Shabbos. Tell me the Judaism you want to build. Tell me your convictions. Why should I want to stop that? Why should I feel angry? Why should I be worried about that? I'm celebrating that. So I say to my Aguda friends, they don't want to let me use their mikveh. Beseder, I'll build my own mikveh. You don't think I'm legitimate? I'm not legitimate. You think my conversions are not valid? Beseder, I think they are. And let me tell you why I think they are. Let me tell you what I emphasize. Argue. They're not going to listen to you. I'm not saying with them. Argue with the Jewish people. We should become the people of the book. We're arguing theology, not just anti-Semitism. Isn't that wonderful? The first time in Jewish history that I can amend that's geschmack to be a Jew. So don't be embarrassed that there's disagreements. Look at the Catholic Church, what's going on there. Everyone says, Amen, there. Everyone says, the Holy See, Amen, they have a bishop, they have a Sanhedrin. Everybody thinks if we have a Sanhedrin, it'll all be right. Look, they have a Sanhedrin there. Look what's going on there. Read David Tracy's work in Chicago, Curran, Hans Kung. Look at the battles on feminism, on the whole women's issue in the Catholic Church. Look at the whole problem of family. Who's united? Why should they be united? The world is so complex. Values are so complex. Values are not deductive syllogisms. Ethics, how to bring up a family. Who do you think? There's some priests who have the answers? There's a science of values? There's a science of theology? No. Different human beings, different sensibilities will have different approaches. So argue, Jewish world. Why are you frightened and scared of the argument? You know what you should be scared of, and this is true. When people become violent and can't argue, then you have to stop them. And that's why my concern is for political stability with an intense argument. But I am very happy over all these crises. I think Ioda Lubavitch and Aguda, they've done the greatest service to the Jewish people. They've given the Reform and moderate Jews an opportunity to stand up and have conviction. I believe in passionate sobriety. I believe that the Litvak and the person who wants to embrace modernity is not a compromiser. I believe that a person who lives with conflicts between his Zeder and what he wants his grandchild to be is a healthy person. But let's articulate that. Finally, we're arguing. So what are you worried about? If, however, people say, I'm going to build my own community in fragmentization, then I appreciate the problem. But it's not going to be that civil. People are going to be nasty because it's important to them. So we have to forgive the nasty people. We do. We have to forgive the fanatics, but just don't give them power. And I ask the sober, liberal, tolerant. I don't believe pluralism and tolerance is a sign of indifference. I don't believe that the liberal has no convictions. I don't believe that fundamentalism really is serious and everything else is just lukewarm. No, I think compromise could be embraced through deep conviction. Pshara could be a sign of conviction. And therefore, what Israel has done now, and that's Israel's greatest gift, more than Jaffa oranges, it has created an agenda for the Jewish people. It has given you a sense that Jewish history is not yet finished. that we are building a nation not yet clear as to the direction we're going to go. You're interested about what Israel should be, then get involved. Don't sit home and make resolutions in Congress and think you're going to change Israel. It's going to demand conviction and involvement and knowledge. There's a call to political action, I think. And therefore I would say, and I think this answers the three questions, and just come to the fourth. How much no should we say, and how should that no become embraced with our sense of solidarity? This is the essence of everything I write philosophically. I haven't got a 60-40, 70-30. You see, there's a difference between being in Jerusalem and being here. Here, the dangers of assimilation may be much greater, and therefore the need to be separate maybe. But yet, if you're more separate here, you lost the joy of participating in the larger society. So then starts the polarization, those who are involved with the larger society and those who are involved with the Jewish society. And then starts ethics versus ritual, and that's again a cheap polarization. In Israel, to me, the great gift of building the Institute in Jerusalem is that I found that in living in Jerusalem, I've given up the elephant and the Jewish question. Very strange thing. A very strange paradox came. In going home, I have a much greater sense of being connected to so many other people who are not Jews than I've ever had before. I have a strong desire to feel and to listen to the dignity of the Arab, to the dignity of the Christian, to the dignity of the Buddhist. I invite all these people to come to the Institute and articulate their conviction. When we studied the tractate Idolatry, I invited a serious Christian theologian to tell me about his love for Jesus. In other words, in coming home, I feel rooted so deeply in Torah that I'm not suspicious of the world. I have found the greater your rootedness in Torah, instead of going back to the ghetto, I feel that I could hear the music of the world. What a strange paradox. Jerusalem has freed me from being obsessively concerned only with Jews. Yeshua. And yet I live in Yerushalayim. I am, in a sense, a member of a powerful national culture. And because I am a member of that culture, I don't have to be obsessed with it, and I can appreciate that which is other than my own. The greater the knowledge, the greater the freedom. The greater the roots, the greater the sense in which your identity is centered, the more you could meet the other. A fragile, frightened identity becomes narcissistic. A sense of integration, a sense of inner dignity creates room for the other. To me, Jerusalem has given the Jewish soul room to love that which is different from the Jew. This is what I celebrate in Jerusalem, and I hope you can celebrate that as well. Shalom.
I just wanted to remind the people here that the rest of your questions are started. Before we close, I would like to ask Rabbi Fisher to stand up to you.
I think it's safe to say that wherever David Hartman is, something happens. And I first met David Hartman many years ago when I was in Oslo. The committee of the Jewish Community Center met to plan an adult education program. And the late Hartman, whom you remember very well, suggested the name of David Hartman from Montreal, and I said, who is he? When he came, I found out. And since then, many more have found out who David Hartman is. So tonight, as usual, you were dazzling in your oratory, you were infused by your brilliance,
And we were teased and enchanted by the possibilities that it presented tonight. But I want to get beyond for a moment. I just want to get beyond the objective brilliance and dazzle of your oratory. Beyond that is the heart. It is the passion which opens up new horizons of thought and new directions. Who are we? What are we? What is Israel? Beyond the campaign box, beyond the bullshit. You and I spoke this summer. We said, you know, maybe what Isaiah said to you, if you don't take it for our media comes born through them. But this is historical nourishment. Well, we thank you for your ability to awaken a passion in us. That's what we need, a passion to stimulate us and to move us. I think you've done that tonight, and that's very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Fine. Shalom. Hi, Sammy.
David, I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes. Okay.
Where are you going now?
You're getting better.